Hey everyone, Richard from Digital Foundry here, and this is Assassin's Creed Origins running on Xbox One X. And yes, in this video we shall be comparing it to the same game running on PlayStation 4 Pro and the top-end PC experience. And joining me to talk about the game and the man who's done all of the comparison work, David Beerton.
Hey Rich. So I guess, this is the big one. It was one of the first third-party titles Microsoft announced at the Xbox One event at E3 with the focus on true 4K, native 4K. So it was fascinating to see how close we're getting to that 4K resolution and, how it stacks up in general against the PlayStation 4 Pro version.
Good stuff. So let's begin with the all-important resolution counts here. So PlayStation 4 Pro had a dynamic resolution scaler that sort of settled between 1440p up to a maximum of what?
I think it's 1584p was the upper bounds of that.
And we're going to be looking at Xbox One X here, and this also has dynamic scaling, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and we have now ruled out checkerboarding for all versions, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, we looked at the PC version and what we thought could be checkerboarding artifacts were there, and there's definitely no checkerboard option on the PC. So it is full native resolution that we're looking at here, and I guess my question for you, Dave, is, obviously the idea of dynamic scaling is that the GPU is kept at 100% load and it's pumping out as many pixels as possible. So in theory, we're looking at how this game engine scales across both Pro and Xbox One X. So what are the figures there in like-for-like situations?
Okay, so basically PlayStation 4 Pro in one of the first missions in the game tends to hover around 1440p, whereas on Xbox One X it kind of varies. It goes from around sort of 1700p, I counted 1728p, all the way up to around 2016p.
Okay, so I've run the figures here and we are looking at an increase in pixel count of between 44 to 96%, so almost a doubling of resolution. Now this isn't precise like-for-like measurements, and I think you've got another figure elsewhere of 1350p absolute minimum on PlayStation 4 Pro versus 1656p on X.
Yep, that's right.
And that produces an increase in pixel count of 50% in favor of the X. So yeah, I'm kind of thinking that 50% extra resolution probably is the kind of likely ballpark increase.
That's basically the lower bounds of the two. I actually found that on Xbox One X it doesn't actually hit that low number that often. It spends most of its time, between sort of 17 to 1800p, that kind of range.
Okay, and on top of that we have temporal anti-aliasing, which kind of smooths off the edges. So it's kind of a soft presentation, but it kind of works on a 4K screen.
Yeah, I think so. It's definitely smooth, but I found that on Xbox One X, when you're approaching 4K, even if you're not hitting it, it's quite convincing. You're not sitting really up close on your 4K screen, so I think it holds up better than the Pro, as it is a little bit sharper in that respect.
And obviously we have the PC version as the kind of control here, which is locked to 2160p. So how does that compare to the X?
So you get a bit of extra sharpness there, but it's not always a dramatic improvement. I guess it sort of depends, because the resolution fluctuates on X. There are times where it can be a bit more softer than PC. At other points you don't really notice so much. I think it can get close enough when it's approaching 4K to deliver a pretty convincing take on giving you that UHD presentation.
Yeah, from my perspective, a lot of these games that are using temporal anti-aliasing, it just seems to be a degree of blurriness that kind of reduces in scale the more powerful the hardware. So we have Pro at the bottom end here in terms of the 4K machines, then you have the X, and then the PC where you literally have as much horsepower as you can throw at it. It's pretty much the best presentation you can get, but there's more obviously than just the pixel count alone. Let's talk about visual features. Now to the untrained eye it kind of looks much of a muchness between the three formats we're looking at here, so how does it all stack up?
Right, well, obviously the basic assets are identical between all three of the platforms, but where you get the improvements are with some of the effects work. So I think shadow quality is the thing that stands out most. On PC you're getting higher resolution shadows, plus the actual cascade draw distance is much higher. And then on Xbox One X it kind of sits in between Pro and PC there.
Okay, so you are getting better shadows.
Yes, you're getting the better shadow cascade, so at a distance these will look better on Xbox One X, though up close the resolution remains the same as on PS4 Pro.
Okay, fair enough. And let's talk about ambient occlusion. This one has been kind of weird. We thought there might have been a difference on, I think it was the base console versions, and the Pro and the PC are kind of looking very similar here, but the X, what's going on there?
Yeah, see, I'm not really kind of sure about this one. Initially, I thought maybe they're using a lower quality version because there's the thicker halos, which you don't normally get when using like HBAO, for example. But at the same time, Assassin's Creed has like a dynamic time of day system, and even in the cutscenes that are supposed to be like for like, I've been noticing variances in sort of shadow placement, lighting, and even ambient occlusion on the platforms where it's quite close, like Pro and PC, for example.
Right, but it's not a massive game changer though.
No, it's not. It's not something that is immediately sort of obvious unless you're sort of looking side by side.
Okay, so let's talk about draw distance here. Would I be right in saying that it's slightly improved on PC and that the console versions are the same?
Yeah, that's right. You get a little bit more extra detail on the PC in the distance, but again, it's one of those things that's quite subtle overall.
Okay, so what about texture filtering? Any improvement there on Xbox One X?
Okay, you get a slight improvement there. It's not massive. I think what's happening here is you're just getting more samples because the resolution is increased. So the filtering level is roughly the same, but it's a bit clearer because of that extra sampling. So it's a minor tweak compared to, base hardware versus these premium consoles.
Okay, good stuff. So let's move on to performance. Now, Pro wasn't actually that bad here, was it? It was essentially running 30 FPS with a bit of wobbling, and by and large not really an issue during gameplay.
Yeah, I found Pro to be mostly satisfactory during gameplay, just the occasional hitch, so that wasn't really the issue. And on Xbox One X, it's very, very similar to Pro in a sense that in gameplay we're not getting locked 30 FPS, but when we do get drops, they're quite minor. There's a little bit of stutter, but nothing that's gonna, really take you out of the experience. But I think it's the cutscenes that are more of an issue rather than the gameplay. That's across all versions of the game, I think.
Yeah, so how does it hold up on Xbox One X there?
Obviously it is faster than PlayStation 4 Pro by a couple of frames per second, but at the same time it's not enough to get you a locked solid 30 frames per second. In fact, it's pretty much consistently below 30 FPS, so it's not a great turnout in terms of the cutscenes, whichever console you're playing on.
Yeah, it's interesting here because the turnout looks very similar to the base PlayStation 4 versus the base Xbox One, but obviously the positions are now reversed with Microsoft in pole position with a small performance lead.
It makes a bit of a difference. It's not quite as stuttery, but yeah, it's not smooth.
Okay, one thing that has been bothering me is the E3 gameplay trailer footage. Now, we actually saw the game running on Xbox One X hardware at both E3 and Gamescom, and it looked nothing like as good as the trailer. And obviously this was a bit of a concern. And how does the final game compare to that teaser?
Well, in the final build they've changed a lot of the lighting, different time of day, so we can't get an exact match with the E3 version, how that compares with the actual finished version in like-for-like scenarios. But, in terms of image quality, I think that was the big thing at E3. We counted native 4K throughout the entire demo. I think it holds up pretty well on Xbox One X, even though in the same sort of scenes you're not getting absolutely native 4K. The difference isn't huge, and I think generally it looks pretty comparable, especially when you're looking at sort of the shadow quality, things like that. Nothing sticks out as being downgraded, as it were, once you get past the sort of lighting, time of day difference.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the actual footage itself, it always just said 4K capture, but the actual presenter on stage mentioned it was running on Xbox One X, and I think at this point, Occam's razor sort of suggests the most likely scenario here is that it was the PC version not running on X hardware.
Yeah, I imagine what they could have done is possibly use the PC version, scaled back certain settings to be more in line with what they thought the Xbox One X would deliver, but obviously kept it at 4K for the presentation.
Yeah, there's a resolution differential, but it's going to be really difficult to pick up on, and I don't really think it's a massive issue, but interesting to check this nonetheless. Now, one last thing that I would like to clarify. HDR. Now, it was added as a patch to all versions of the game when the Xbox One X version dropped. So yes, you do get HDR on PC, PS4 Pro and the X. Now, there has been some confusion about the HDR settings and what they actually do. So here's the screen. Dave, what do they do?
Okay, so I actually thought this was a pretty cool option that the developer included as well, because depending on what HDR screen you have, some do HDR better than others, the tone mapping can vary, how bright, how dark, and it means that it's really difficult to get a great experience across multiple TVs. So these options basically allow you to adjust the picture to make it more authentic or more accurate to the screen you're using. So the first option, the maximum luminance one, essentially sets the clipping point. So for example, if you set this to say 2000 nits, it will show highlight detail up to that level if your TV is capable of doing so with its tone mapping algorithm. Alternatively, if you reduce this, it will clip the detail level at a lower amount. So if your TV basically is showing details all the way up to 10,000 nits and you find the picture too dark, if you lower the maximum luminance, effectively you should in theory get a brighter picture on that TV. And in terms of the Paperwhite option, this is basically the ability to set the brightness of standard white. So things like the HUD elements and text. It starts off at around 120 nits, which is generally the setting used for general white in terms of like UHD Blu-ray. But the cool thing here is if you're finding mid-tones a little bit too dull, you can increase the standard white or paper white and it'll bring up mid-tones to be a bit brighter. So I guess what's awesome about this is that it gives you enough control to make your HDR experience brighter if your screen handles HDR in such a way that it can appear duller than what you can expect.
Right, okay, but you actually tried this and you set the maximum luminance to the maximum luminance of our Panasonic 4K display, and it actually made things look a bit worse, so you recommend actually increasing it a bit.
Yeah, that's right. I actually lowered the slider down to I think around 500 nits and well, it completely obliterated the highlight detail. In fact, it almost looked like it was just clipping the highlights portion altogether, so it looked really wrong. But when I moved the slider back up to 1000 nits, that seemed to resolve and it basically looked correct again. So my advice here is if you need to lower it to bring up extra brightness, then only reduce it to 1000 nits.
I guess fundamentally the screens are expecting a brighter image and they're doing their own tone mapping, so in many cases that will do the job for you.
Yeah, it's kind of conflicting at the moment. General rule of thumb though from what I've seen is that if you set it at 1000 nits you should have enough brightness, even on sets like the LG B7 and the Samsung TVs, which are basically showing detail way above that.
Well, I think that kind of wraps it up. Is there anything else we need to add?
No, I think pretty much covers everything.
Okay, good stuff. Well, thanks for that, Dave.
Yeah, no worries, Rich.
And well, that was Assassin's Creed Origins on Xbox One X stacked up against PlayStation 4 Pro and PC. Now, to see this video at its absolute best, please do consider supporting the Digital Foundry Patreon, where everything we do can be downloaded at source file quality, and it is a huge upgrade over YouTube, let me tell you. Beyond that, please do like and subscribe to support our work, but that's all from us for now. Thanks for watching.
Stay behind me, Harry. Keep the Gideon safe.